Hi everyone, it's Chelsea from Little Mountain Ranch. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to the high tunnel. So what I'm going to be doing today in the high tunnel is topping all of my tomato plants. So that literally means going along and cutting the tops off of all of these plants, which might seem a little bit extreme, except here in our zone 3B, we're already getting down below 10 degrees Celsius at night. Any temperatures below 10 degrees Celsius really does stunt the growth of heat-loving plants, including tomatoes. We're at the point in the season where anything that is not already well developed, it can even be at the point like these guys here, these cherry tomatoes here, this size will probably be fine and will have a chance to mature and to ripen even on the vine. But anything that is like this right here will not. I'll also be removing any flower blossoms on these as well because they're just not going to have time to ripen. This time last year we actually had a light frost in our garden and I was running heaters in the high tunnel trying to keep the frost off of the tomato plants. So I'm happy this year because it's a little bit warmer and there's a good likelihood I'll be able to ripen most of the tomatoes that are already developed on these vines on the vines, which is great instead of having to bring everything inside. The whole point of cutting off the tops of these plants and removing all these flowers is that the plant is going to still put a lot of energy into developing all of this if I leave it here. And instead of doing that, what I want it to do is to put the energy into developing the fruit that are already on the vines. So that's basically the idea behind that. You can also do this with any other plant that's flowering this time of year, eggplant, peppers, or anything like that that are not going to have enough time to develop fruit. So that is the plan for right now. I'm going to need to track down my scissors and get these cut. Any kind of scissors will do. Kids crafting scissors will work just fine. And I go along and I just cut off and leave in the aisle. Those ones might be okay, but I have so many on here that I'll just take those off as well. And then I just start chopping them off. Like this is a good example. Those just will not have time to develop, even though they're only cherry tomatoes. They won't. And not only that, I have so many cherry tomatoes that I don't need to leave those ones on. So I'm going to go through here, clip all the flowers off everywhere. And then top everything. So anything that is above my trellis here, which is at about 5 feet, I'm going to remove. Normally I will experiment every year with 1 or 2 different varieties of new tomatoes. Prior to the high tunnel, which we didn't grow, we built last year, I just had a small little greenhouse, so it was mostly just for fun and experimentation anyway. I couldn't grow enough in there to can or anything like that. So it made sense to experiment and it was just sort of fun. But this year I experimented with a lot of different varieties and quite a few of them I won't be planting again, and I'll share those with you as we go along. And they took up a lot of real estate in the high tunnel. So all in all, I didn't end up getting as many good tomatoes for canning as I did last year, just with experimenting so much. It's that I'm not trellising all of these tomatoes that are sort of falling over up. And it's just because we're far enough into the season now that it doesn't matter anymore. I have a ton of volunteer tomatillos in the high tunnel. They're coming up everywhere. I let a few of them go just to see what would happen. But anyway, back to my tomatoes. And having grown tomatoes for long enough now to have a pretty good idea about what works and what doesn't here in our growing season, I'm gonna stick to probably just 3 or 4 varieties of tried and true tomatoes. Looks like we have a helicopter. We have lots of helicopters right now because the forest fire season has been a little bit crazy up here in British Columbia, so they're constantly flying over checking for hot spots. And the other thing is that I grew a lot of cherry tomatoes this year, and that's something that I haven't done in the past. And the reality is we just don't eat a ton of cherry tomatoes. My husband and I really enjoy them, and my eldest daughter, but all the younger kids don't really like them that much. There's 2 varieties of cherry tomatoes that I will be growing again. One is the red cherry, and that's just what it's called, is the red cherry. And the other one is, let's see if I can find one. is the Sun Gold. These are two varieties of tomatoes. That are so delicious, super sweet and tangy, which is the way I like my tomatoes. So I'll probably only grow 1 or 2 plants of each variety next year. All right, let's move you down the aisle with me. Here, this is the Stupichka, and they do really well here in our northern garden. And even though they're a smaller tomato, they are nice and acidic, and I like adding them to my sauces. And so I'll be growing these ones again, not probably as many as I did. So here's an example of ones that I know these guys here, I just know aren't going to be able to ripen, but these ones here likely will. So I'll take it right above the top of that. I'll probably just plant 4 or 5 of these guys. These are Manitoba bush tomatoes down here, and this is one that I will definitely be growing year after year. I've talked about them for the last couple of years. They are the earliest tomato by far. They were weeks and weeks and weeks ahead of all of my other tomatoes. They are a bush variety of tomato, a determinate tomato, which means they have a predetermined size they're going to grow to, a predetermined number of fruit. They don't need to be pruned at all like the indeterminate tomatoes do, which is nice because it's a little bit less work, which is always a good thing, especially during gardening season where it's pedal to the metal all the time. So these guys I will be planting every year, and I will probably plant an entire row of them similar to what I did this year. These guys here are called Amethyst Cream. So this was a cherry tomato from Wild Boar Farms, and I am not actually a huge fan of these tomatoes. Almost all of the tomatoes I tried from Wild Boar Farms I absolutely loved, but these were not one of them. These split really, really easily, and because I'm not always on top of my tomato picking, I ended up losing quite a few of these to splitting. The flavor is, it's okay. It's not terrible, but it's just not good enough for me to want to take up space in my high tunnel growing them. They're a really pretty tomato, but as you can see, just pulling that off split it. So yeah, that's not one that I'll be doing again. One I will be doing again for sure from Wild Boar Farms are these guys down here. This one is called Crushed Heart. It's ripe enough, I'll pull it off. Number 1, that's the prettiest tomato ever. It's beautiful heart-shaped tomato. The flavor is absolutely fantastic, and they're growing really well for me, and they're quite prolific for a larger tomato like this. This is a large tomato in a northern garden, but I really love those, so I will be growing those again for sure. All right, let's top these guys while we're over here. Oh, got another one in over here that is probably a good cherry tomato if you like cherry tomatoes. This is also Wild Boar Farm. This is Barry's Crazy Cherry. Really nice flavor. I won't be planting them again either, just because, like I said, we don't eat a ton of cherry tomatoes, but if you do and you love them, then this is a really good one, and it's super prolific. Here, I'll show you these ones. These are just a beautiful tomato. This is an atomic grape tomato, also from Wild Boar Farms. Let's see if I can find one that's ripened here. Isn't that absolutely gorgeous? Such a beautiful tomato. I really like the flavor of these ones, so I probably will grow one of these for next year just for snacking as I'm wandering through the high tunnel, because I really like the flavor. And as far as prolific goes, they are pretty prolific, and they also seem to do well here in the north. So that will be one that I'll keep on for next year. These guys over here are the Arbison. This is a beefsteak tomato, and it's not as huge as probably the beefsteak tomatoes you're used to seeing, but this is going to be one that I will grow an entire row of next year. They're super uniform. Let's see if I can find a ripe one. They are super uniform in size. They grow really nice clumps of about 6 to 7 tomatoes, and the flavor is great, and they're awesome for canning. So for a northern beefsteak tomato, this will be one that I grow year after year for sure. Really confident this is too small, but I'm gonna leave it anyway because I'd like to get as many of these as possible. One of the things that you can do with your tomatoes is bring them inside, and most people that garden in the north have to end up doing that at least a little bit. Bring them inside, put them in a box lined with newspaper just in between, and let those sit, and they will ripen over time. I do the same thing with my squash when I don't get my squash ripening in the garden, although this year I think I will. The other thing that I found about the Arbosan is that they didn't grow a ton of leaves. Once I had them pruned up, they didn't just go crazy like some of the other tomatoes do, which was really nice. Just less work again, which is always good. Out of all of the flowers that developed on my Cuckoozy, I only ended up with a couple of fruits. So this one is supposed to be a mix between a cucumber and a zucchini, and they're supposed to grow really, really, really long. I think they're also called a snake gourd, but I have this one here and then this little one over here out of all of the flowers that formed on there, but I still think that's kind of neat. We'll see what happens with it. This one here is a pink Berkeley tie-dye. As far as flavor goes, this one is absolutely fabulous. And I think for a southern garden, they'd be a really great tomato because they're delicious, but they just didn't do as well here in my garden. So I won't be planting those ones again either. And not on the subject of tomatoes, but on the subject of just adorable. These are the cucamelons, and I like them. I think they're really good. Super crunchy. Very, very lemony tasting, but none of my kids really love them. So I don't know if it'll be something that I'll grow again. Cucumbers are just about done. Only have a couple left. The nice thing is I was a little bit worried about having powdery mildew just because the humidity level is higher in the high tunnel. But I haven't really had that. There's a little bit of powdery mildew, it looks like, might be forming on there, but these are done anyway, so I can just rip these vines out. And these ones are, if I remember correctly, alpaca, I think is what it is, or olaca or something like that. I'll put it on the screen anyway. These are a paste tomato that's specifically developed for northern growing, and they're definitely developing well, but I haven't had any ripen yet. So we'll have to see how they do towards the end of the season, whether they'll ripen on the vine or not, and that will determine whether or not I grow them again. Paste tomatoes are one of the tomatoes that I haven't been successful in growing. I actually just bought 80 pounds of paste tomatoes, Roma paste tomatoes, to make my salsa with because I really like them for salsa. But I really would like to get to the point where I didn't have to do that. So hopefully these do okay. Growing eggplant is new to me. This is the first year I've ever done it, and they did really well, but we also had an extremely hot summer. So I'm sure that's why, but I'm hoping I can grow them again because I absolutely love eggplant. I've only had eggplant once or twice in my life, but having it fresh right off of the plant like this, fried with garlic butter, so good. So I'll be growing these again for sure. These guys are my sweet potatoes. I have not started to dig underneath to see if I have any actual sweet potatoes growing yet. I'm gonna wait until the vines die back and then dig them up at that point. But they look like they're doing okay, so hopefully. These tomatoes here were sent to me from Estonia, and a funny story, and I don't know if I shared this with you on a previous video, but these were mislabeled. These were labeled as Manitoba bush, and the Manitoba bush were labeled as these tomatoes, which are called Urk, which I think means bright in Estonian, if I remember correctly. So all along in the early spring, I thought it was the Urk tomatoes that were developing really, really early, but it turns out that no, it was actually the Manitoba bush tomatoes that were developing early. Didn't take me long to clue into that, but it was a labeling issue. So needless to say though, these tomatoes are quite prolific and they are doing really well. I have some nice ripe ones down here. So I'm just gonna see, because there is a ton of tomatoes on here, but there are quite a few that aren't ripe yet. Like as you can see all in here, these are all green, but they are starting to ripen. So if they ripen out in the next couple of weeks, then I probably will grow these again because they're so prolific and they are really good. They're a nice tomato. Using them to make sauce. And these ones I should probably clip off too, although they don't really seem like they're growing a ton of extra stuff. Making salsa today, so I'm gonna have to pick a bunch of peppers too. I'll save talking about the peppers for another video. Oops, I probably shouldn't have taken those ones. Those ones probably would have developed just fine. The plants have already slowed down on their flowering quite a bit anyway, being signaled from those cold nighttime temperatures. So I'm not actually having to take off very many flower blooms. There, we have pretty much everything off. I still have a few cherries to do, a few arbusons back there, but I'm also going to need my basket so I can pick the ripe tomatoes and all of the peppers that I need for my salsa. Just one sec. These ones are the banana peppers and the hot wax peppers, which are actually my favorite peppers to do just about anything with, whether it's jelly or like a cowboy candy. Guess I may as well get all these ripe tomatoes picked too. I don't know if I told you guys this in one of my previous videos, but it's really neat because this high tunnel kind of created its own little ecosystem in here. I had aphids at the beginning of the year quite badly on my peppers, and shortly thereafter a whole bunch of ladybugs moved in and started to munch on them. And then after that, the lacewings moved in and they completely got rid of all of the rest of the aphids. The only thing that I did for management was to keep them sprayed off with water. I didn't do anything else, and I didn't end up with any severe damage. And I mean, we had a lot of aphids in here in the earlier spring. So I just think that's really neat. All right, everyone, that is it for me today. But before I go, I just wanted to give you an update on the garlic that you can see hanging on my porch. It's in the shade, but the weather has been perfect. It's been hot and windy, so it's cured very quickly. I'll be able to put it inside probably in another day or two. I did cut one of the stalks and could see a little bit of green in it, so I want to wait until they're completely dry so they store well. Next year, I'm planning on at least 5 or 6 different varieties. I'm new to growing garlic, so I want to experiment a little bit and find out what works well, but it seems to grow really well in our climate, which is awesome. All right, I'm gonna grab a couple of these garlic to add to the salsa, bring all my goodies from the high tunnel in the house, and go and get canning. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.